Thank you so much. That was an incredible introduction, very generous, and I'm thrilled to be here. I want to thank, first of all, the people who organized this incredible conference. It's been amazing, right? All the speakers, the inspiration that we've been able to have. I feel particularly honored to be here because, as you have gleaned, I am not a writer. That said, I do certainly consider myself an author. And what we're going to talk about today is specifically the nature of truth. You may not have noticed this, but that was the theme of the conference. Not so many other speakers adhering to the theme, but I was like a good soldier. I was like, I got to make some nature of truth deck to share with everybody. So I'm going to be caught up in that and talk a little bit about that specifically. Now, lots of different dimensions to the idea of the nature of truth, but I want to start here. This is what's happening to all of our brains, hopefully exactly right now. These are not just specific neurons that are firing. This is the exact part of your brain that writes memories. This is the part of your brain that's retaining exactly what's happening right now for a variety of different reasons. And the reason that I want to focus on this is one could argue that designing museums and experiences in public spaces, I'm in the memory business, trying to create memories for people. Experiences that endure, and as Scott was saying, experiences that catalyze people into action. So just quick examples. This is the London Mithraeum. It's an ancient Roman mystery cult temple that we built a three-dimensional hologram of that you step inside of and you hear literally the ritualistic chants that happened inside of it 2,000 years ago. Or this experience that we built for the New York Times, where we built dioramas of local reporting and embedded them in the 5 bureaus so that people walking by could discover and then listen to the articles in the actual places where they happened. Or this experience, which we made for the Guggenheim Bilbao Museum, Frank Gehry's masterpiece. This is their new orientation experience, which has multivalent projections and reflections to create an overture to the innovation of that area. So you get some sense that our work takes place in space, and it wants to marry together what's innovative and meaningful. But I did want to honor a bunch of the different speakers that certainly I've been inspired with this weekend, and specifically starting with this quote. I love this from Mohsen Ahmed. I don't know who saw this yesterday at 9:30. It was incredible. You're staring at a piece of wood having a hallucination. Has anybody heard a better description of this moment? This is actually from Planet Word. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later in the talk. But this sums up a feeling that I have when I'm opening not just a book, but a world. And I am confident that every single person here has had this experience, or you wouldn't come and journey all the way to beautiful Sun Valley to be part of this experience. And this is really the written word at its best. This is the moment when that voice that's inside your head, that incessant beating drum of your own consciousness, is magically replaced with the author's. Right? When we built Planet Word, we talked about this as a moment that technology, words that can create invisibility, telekinesis, teleportation, levitation. Every superpower you can imagine is brought forward by that moment where your inside is suddenly opened up to this other world. And that's what I really want to talk about today. The specificity of that membrane between yourself and your inner experience and these worlds that other people are authoring for you, that you're transversing through. So I'm going to talk about 3 built projects and the specific approaches that we use to bridge that gap. And then at the end, I'm actually going to take what is certainly in my world of design a huge risk, and I'm going to show you not only unbuilt work, but unbuilt work that I'm still prototyping an experiment with that I haven't shown to anyone before. So you're going to get something, and if you hate it, that's fine, because it's at the end and it'll be quick and there's some jokes inside of it. So I promise it'll be okay. That said, the first project I wanted to start with focuses specifically not just on the how we did this, but also on the why. And that's something that we spend a lot of time in museums and public institutions really deeply considering to position the institutions that we're building. And so the first technique in museum that I want to talk about is how we focused on having people take things personally when we thought about the 9/11 museum. Now, this museum just within the last few years, has been voted by TripAdvisor the #1 museum in America, the #2 museum in the world, right behind the Louvre. It's hard to unseat the Louvre. But you have to stop and think about that within the world of different ticketed experiences. This is a museum that focuses on the largest mass murder in America. And people leave there and of their own volition go online and tell other people, you have to go see this museum. And the reason that is because when we started the original competition that we answered to win the project itself, which actually started for me exactly here, I suddenly recognized that this could not be a typical museum at all. So I'll never forget, it's 34th Street, heading downtown to a meeting, planning out the competition that we were doing with Think Design. 16 international firms were trying to get this job. We were a tiny firm. We seemed totally incapable of winning the project. We were 4 people at the time. 3 of them were freelance. Totally crazy. And I'm looking out over this platform, seeing all these people going back and forth and thinking in my head about all that I'm reading. And a bunch of things jumped into my mind. First thing is that 10,000 people ran out of the burning buildings to save their own lives on that day. And a third of the world watched that event live or on the same day itself. And so I'm seeing these people pass back and forth in front of me. I had sort of a panic attack. I was like, what museum are we going to create where a curator is going to tell somebody about what 9/11 is about? Right? You just can't do that. You can't speak to a survivor's family and tell them what 9/11 is about. And if you remember, at that time in America, everybody had a 9/11 story. Everybody had a deep, sharp shock of emotion attached to exactly their own experience. You put that together with a whole other audience we had. You may not remember, I just looked it up, it was shocking. The number of people who believed that the federal government either launched the attack or actively stepped back and wanted the attack to happen was 1/3. That was the audience for the museum. So what is the museum that you think you're going to create that will be able to speak with intelligence and meaning and relevance to all those different people? So I rarely do this, but I wanted to show you, because we're talking about authoring, these are the original competition materials that we put together to actually win the project itself. So the first thing we did was try and make it as real as possible, which is to say, no pieces of twisted steel on the floor. We literally lifted it up, as you can see here, and the actual steel, the exoskeleton of the building, bends forward, where you can see exactly where the cone of the plane entered into the building. When you walked through the museum, again, this is what we were pitching, we had 2 different voices to bring forward. We boiled it down to essentially text in white, which was meant to be bare, objective, unassailable facts, and then text in blue, which was meant to be personal, oral histories, and memories. So like a waterfall, thousands of panes of glass shattering is such a good example of what Anna Deavere Smith calls the poetry of everyday language. And as you went through this experience, not only did you have different voices, you could also put together the objective facts with different artifacts, different photographs. The sound you're hearing is called the man down sound, which firefighters were playing at that time. And then you could hear oral histories like this one from Stanley Praimnath talking about watching the plane go in.
Eye-level eye contact. I can still see this big U on this plane, the tail of this plane, and this plane is bearing down on me. And I dropped the phone, and I screamed, and I dove under the desk.
And it's the kind of thing where when you hear enough of those types of remembrances, you just recognize you can't make anything more impactful than these individual personal memories. It overcomes any form of what I later started to learn was called confirmation bias. This is a psychological phenomenon where literally what you see in the world is what overlaps between objective facts and what confirms your belief. This is a filtration system for our consciousness. It keeps us from being exposed to things that we might find too threatening. And so with this broadest of different audiences, with all their different wounds and traumas and foregone conclusions, this was a technique to basically overcome these hurdles that our consciousness puts in front of us. It's sort of like a shorthand if you think, typically you say seeing is believing. Humans actually work in the opposite way. For us, believing is seeing, which actually makes all sorts of problems for us, which I'll focus on later when I talk about climate change. But that said, when you walk into this museum, the first voices that you see welcome your voice, welcome your entry narrative, your own memories. Languages from all around the world talking about what they saw on 9/11.
On the day of September 11th, 2001.
On September 11th. September 11th.
I was in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Cairo, Egypt.
des Champs-Élysées à Paris.
In college at UC Berkeley.
I was in Times Square.
São Paulo do Brasil.
Estava in Miami, Florida.
The Scottish Highlands.
We were actually in a meeting when someone barged in and said,
Oh my God, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center.
Kind of frantically get to a radio.
When I heard it over the radio.
And so you've heard the beginning of people's memories. You then see people witnessing. That's what those photographs are. And then at the bottom of that ramp, you witness what's called the slurry wall. That's the original wall that withstood the pressure of the Hudson for a full year as they cleared out the entire site. Now, the museum has an incredible amount of artifacts and stories, just an overwhelming mass of different evidence and individual experiences. But certainly what I think of as the emotional heart of the museum, and confidentially what Alice Greenwald, the head of the museum, said is her favorite, most emotional part of the experience, are these listening chambers that we put together. Now, because 9/11 happened when it did, no cell phones, very, very few photographs. There are about 3 or 4 known photographs inside of the building. So the only way to tell the story of what happened was literally through these personal memories. So I'm going to go ahead and play one for you now.
It started out a really nice day. When I looked out the window, I see this gigantic plane in the center of Manhattan. You would never really see a plane that big, and especially that close. It was making like a beeline through the towers.
I could see it coming closer and closer. I could see the AA on its tail. I could see inside the tinted windows of the cockpit. And then it just bellowed into Tower 1. It was just swallowed up by the building. The plane was gone, and all there was this red, black smoke.
Hell broke loose as far as stuff raining down on top of us. So we had to literally take cover. One of the landing wheels from the aircraft that had just struck the building fell, burning right in front of us.
All of a sudden it got very quiet. One of the firemen from Rescue 1 looked up and he said, "We may not live through today." And we looked at him and we looked at each other and we took the time to shake each other's hands and wish each other good luck. We're gonna have to walk up 80 flights of stairs with our gear on, but this is what we have to do. We're going upstairs and we're going to save somebody.
We were going up the escalator in Borders, and there was a fireman, couldn't have been more than 19 years old, with a hose on his shoulder. And I remember looking at him and saying to him, "There's nothing you can do. Don't go in there." And he just said, "Lady, it's my job. I have to do it."
And from there, we show the few photographs. People make their way through the entire experience. But the final chapter is up to you, the visitor, to fill in. We invite each visitor to share their own memories and their own thoughts. Those memories are then tagged by geography, and they're projected directly onto the slurry wall as part of the permanent collection. So in terms of memories, people are able to visit with other people's memories, see this community of remembrance build over time and transition and evolve throughout the history of that museum. It's incredible because, again, when we started thinking about the diverse series of audiences, we also had to start thinking about people who knew nothing about 9/11 and what that would be like for them as they move through. These are shots that I took just literally with my phone. My father came home from work that day in a dusty suit. I thank God he came home at all. I miss you both every day. I love you, Dad and Chris. Love John. Or we were mere kids when this happened, and now as adults, we understand the impact of this tragic event. And because you yourself have been invited to write these different messages, the authenticity that fills and swells from these different offerings is overwhelming. The last thing I'll say is actually what President Obama said on the day that he opened the museum. And I have to tell you, it was an out-of-body experience to hear the president reiterate back to us that original kernel of an idea, that we were not creating a museum. We were creating a container for memories, for your memories, for the museum's memories, and for the memories that grow over time. He said, here we will tell their story so that generations yet unborn will never forget. Of coworkers who led others to safety, passengers who stormed a cockpit, our men and women in uniform who rushed into an inferno, our first responders who charged up those stairs, a generation of service members, our 9/11 generation. It's incredible to witness the way in which taking it personally could offer an opportunity for people to pass the threshold of their own comfort into this other world and to join, really to escape their own sometimes incredibly deep and traumatic wounds, to join this larger community of remembrance. The next project that I want to share has a very, very different take in terms of crossing that threshold, and also a very different tone. It's called Planet Word. Ann Friedman, the founder, actually spoke at this conference while we were still designing the project. And the approach that we took is a little bit of the opposite. I call it play for impact. And the idea here, that was the original concept of the museum, is what would it be like if we made a museum, sort of extending that idea of putting in your own story, but here it's a place where you play, where you discover, and where you create. It's essentially a museum of words and languages. It's the world's first voice recognition museum. But you're invited to discover your own voice. And when you walk in, this is what you see. It's a little under 1% of the English language, this huge word wall that speaks to you, but it also listens to you and responds to you. And as it's telling you the history of the English language, which, if you don't know, actually began with the Norman conquest, this incredible bloody battle that crashed two early European languages together and formed this mutt of a language we know as English. Here it is. Right? And you move from here into this world where you discover 31 different world languages and come face to face with different people telling you about the language and the cultures that they come from.
Sanibonani. My name is Zoliswa and I am from South Africa, where about 10 million people speak the Zulu language, isiZulu. Zulu is a click language. That means we have consonants and vowels like you have in English. But we also have 3 special consonants that are click sounds. They are q, and q. For the first one, you put your tongue behind your top teeth, suck air in and release, like this. Try it.
Nice to hear you trying it. Nice work. So you share in all these different world languages. You meet these people from around the world, and they teach you little secrets in terms of how their language works. This is a secret in and of itself within Planet Word. This globe and this room actually represent the biggest space inside of the building, and they use it for rentals. So that actual piece of exhibitry is actually a robot that collapses and pulls up into a chandelier, and then they're able to clear out the space underneath it. It's like a little fun fact, which you can see if you're there. But throughout the whole exhibit space, there's nothing but surprises. This is an exhibit about descriptive language, and you literally paint with words. You dip your paintbrush into different vocabulary words. I personally never knew what crepuscular meant until I used this exhibition. But you can then also go to this space. We co-designed this with Paul Simon. He's the pop star who helped us understand the ways in which words and rhyming and language come together in these pop songs to create these earworms that we just can't get out of our mind. You can see from one to the next, it's a very different approach, again, to passing that threshold between what's inside of us and what sits in the outside world. In this case, we're expanding that inner world. We're making it so much bigger through your choices, through your vision, your advice. You're creating that world with your own agency. And similar to confirmation bias, there's again a psychological phenomenon that's associated with that. We call it the endowment effect. And essentially what it means is the stuff that we own, the stuff that we make, the stuff that we create, We overvalue, we are biased towards it. We love these things. This is not rocket science, but they've proven this over and over again inside of the lab. Which brings me to this moment. This is the magical library that literally sits at the literal as well as the figurative heart of the entire museum itself. You can see it here. We started with 50 books. We're making another 50 books, all of which are operable, which means that you can literally take any of the books down and you can drop them onto the table and open them, and the world of that book spills magically from outside of the book itself. This is a world in which you can see A Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. You can see The Curious Incident of the Dog of the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. This is The Diary of Anne Frank. I'm sure you can guess this is Life of Pi. And just again, in terms of process and authorship, this is the first one that we ever made. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And here's the prototype. We dropped it down, and you can see literally Alice herself spinning into this vortex of a universe. You can see the book turn into the Cheshire Cat, spill itself into the White Rabbit, and you go on that journey with Alice as it's being described to you, and you're making your way in. Sometimes you hear from authors, sometimes you hear from readers, but that ability for us to take this complex, again, hallucination and make it concrete, make it real, is a core part of what we do with all of our projects. And in particular, I'm going to talk about for the third built work, which is called Greenwood Rising. Make it real. This project is the Tulsa Race Massacre Museum. It's a history of Black Wall Street, built for the centennial, which was in 2021. At the opening, I specifically talked about it as a testament against what I called the destruction of memory in history. I talked about it saying, the destruction of memory is another form of Holocaust. And I was inspired, actually, by this man, who was the acting director, Phil Armstrong. Grew up in Houston, went to a historically black college, moved to Tulsa as a young man, walking around the neighborhood, visits with a neighbor who had grown up in Greenwood in the neighborhood. The neighbor said, "Oh, what are you doing? Congratulations, welcome." Blah, blah. He says, "Oh, I'm walking around. I'm looking at sites of what at that point was called the race ride. I'm looking for different sites on the race ride." And this woman who'd grown up in Greenwood looked at her straight face, and she said, "What race ride?" And that was the state of Greenwood as we had entered. So that's myself with State Senator Matthews and Governor Stitt, and my partner on the work, Lorraine Arthur-Mensa, who's amazing. 20 years before that, the state had commissioned this truth-seeking commission on, as you see, the Tulsa race riot. And they really tried to make it a cover-up no more. So they developed this historic record. Keep in mind, if you don't know about the event, before 9/11, it was the worst act of domestic terrorism in the history of the United States. And the state, not shockingly, had a lot that it had to actually atone for and speak to. One of the more famous aspects of it is that the state's own police opened up huge armaments, giving firearms to the citizens to make their way into Greenwood, as private planes dropped bombs to completely destroy this thriving Black Wall Street neighborhood. This report had amazing recommendations like scholarships, a memorial, community investment. Not shockingly, nothing happened. So 20 years later, this man organized a centennial commission. And he had this vision, and the vision that the commission came forward with was quite forward-looking, which is to say it was not just about the past, but it was also specifically about the present. Might be because he's a politician. It might be because he was in touch with the African-American community, particularly in Greenwood. But his line was turning tragedy into triumph and really focusing on the systems that allowed that race riot, now called race massacre, to happen and encouraged it, and tracing those systems all the way into the present day, which is the same thing we heard from the community when we met with them. They said, tell the truth, tell the whole truth. It's not about the past. Don't have it just be defined by that individual moment in time. We actually have a whole section that was rewritten in concert based on these different meetings that we had. And this reminds me of this amazing quote from Monty Perry. She said on this stage yesterday, "The challenge is to tell the story true." And the big challenge here is how you do it in a way, again, to bring people into a story they don't necessarily want to hear. And this is a story they so didn't want to hear, again, on both sides, on all sides of it, there was a mass amnesia 2 generations later. When you first walk into the museum, this is what you see, a film that specifically mixes the past with the present, filled with images of members of today's Greenwood community. And the poem is Maya Angelou's Still I Rise, which she reads.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave, and so I rise, I rise.
And having been through that overture, you then walk, you see this projection of old Greenwood, and you enter into a recreated historic barbershop.
I'm living in it now, Jerome. This is our promised land. We could buy us a seat at the table. That's what you think. Won't be long now. People are just people.
But left unchecked, those people could be a dangerous mob.
Let the church say amen.
And so if you imagine, this is life in Greenwood. This is the way that we tell this story. It's meant to be disarming. It's meant to be fun. It's also meant to be about the present moment. It is totally recognizable as an African-American barbershop where people are gossiping and joking and teasing each other and sharing the struggles, which not shockingly mirror today's struggles exactly. And having been through that experience, we then have this one, which we call the Arc of Oppression, which tells a very challenging history of America from before its founding in 3 different strata: political, social, and economic. And you see these 3 different strata of systems moving across time, all the way from the time the first African enslaved people were brought to America, all the way through the massacre itself. And this is an embodied argument, again, that this was not a few bad apples, this was not just a couple of people, these were systems that acknowledged and inflamed exactly what's now known as the Red Summer, of which Tulsa was the height. And you go from that contextual moment, and again, similar to 9/11, nothing left in terms of artifacts or photographs. The only thing we had were recorded oral histories from people who had been there on that day.
He was begging, please, don't set my house on fire. Please, don't set my house on fire. Of course, that is exactly what they did.
And you move from there into what we call changing fortunes. It's the rest of the 20th century, little known, but Greenwood was actually built back twice as large after the massacre, a testament to the incredible ingenuity and the resilience of that community. And then, the biggest payoff, having watched people grimace and squirm uncomfortably, understanding what happened in our past, we get to the present moment. And in the present moment, we refocus on exactly those same 3 themes in today. We talk about reparations, we talk about criminal justice, we talk about redlining, we talk about voter suppression. We talk about how these systems have just continued in time all the way to today, and then we invite people to sit down and have conversations, whether they're school groups, families, or visitors together. With that, I wanted to introduce the third way in which we're sort of crossing this threshold. Again, growing that outside world in this case, and really bringing it into people in an immersive way, in a concrete way, and in a material way, which actually makes up for what's called presentism. This is the third sort of optical illusion for our brain that I'm going to explain or delve into. Presentism is this well-known condition where humans are super terrible at thinking about anything besides what's material in front of them. And frankly, and particularly in terms of history, Americans are really good at this. Right? The past is past, can't we move on? Right? That's the American credo. So this museum very concretely, yes, delves into the past, but brings it right up into the present day, and in particular ends with this moment, where we ask people to make commitments to actions. It's one thing to feel something, it's another thing to act differently. And whether it's what you buy, how you vote, who you hire, what you read, what you talk about, what you advocate for, this space, similar to Planet Word with the endowment effect, invites you to put in your own answer to how to change the world and move forward in what we call the journey towards reconciliation. We actually had these two amazing political scientists study this. This is from Loyola and Dartmouth, asking this question, right? It's one thing to change hearts and minds, it's another thing to change hands. And in this case, we wanted to look at not just the opinions, but the behaviors of visitors. And sure enough, through the techniques, they're not just more favorable towards reparative policies, they're also more likely to take actions themselves. And I think it does boil down to even the other projects I was showing. The story of survivors was most impactful for me because I imagined what it would have been like to see my dad on his knees in front of my house begging a stranger to not destroy it. It made me feel the very powerful sense of total helplessness for absolutely no reason. And that is the power of storytelling, which leads me to the last and maybe biggest challenge, certainly in the current era of what I'm trying to do. This is, again, sort of unprecedented. I'm showing stuff that I've never showed anyone, so I'm open for any and all feedback. This is work that I'm doing on the climate crisis. And specifically, I'm going to build a prototype, and I'll show you the experience towards the end in New York City. The end of September, there's something called Climate Week. I'm hoping to bring in large policymakers or heads of corporations, people with large levers to pull in terms of making changes, as well as potentially, hopefully, bring it to a museum like Museum of the City of New York to open it to the general public. But the reason specifically that I'm trying to work within climate is this amazing quote from Hernan Diaz. He said on this stage, narratives have the capacity to shape and conform the world. And I think in particular with climate, it's so critical to understand this moment in time. Climate is not a science problem, right? The science has been settled for 2 generations for sure. It's also not a solutions problem. The solutions are there. What we need is action. And I know I'm the hammer looking for a nail, but I think that is a storytelling problem, right? And I would be lying if I didn't concede that part of it is just the hubris of thinking that this is an amazing problem to solve as a storyteller. It's sort of the Mount Everest of narrative problems. How do you frame America, which now has these solutions, right? There's the idea of electrification, of clean energy. The IRA, this huge federal bill, has done its job in terms of subsidies. Now, we need culture change to mass adoption and to spur that adoption. Now, let me just ask, and it's no judgment either way, who feels frustrated that there isn't more momentums around solutions today around climate? All right, so you're my people. That's amazing. That said, tough news, when you actually look at people adopting this, it's all in the single digits, right? That's corporations, that's businesses, that's individuals, that's governments, that's institutions, right? Are people making these changes? I'm going to turn to one of my favorite comedians, Mark Moran. He's going to talk about the environmental end of the world.
Certainly it's been ending environmentally for a long time, and we've all kind of known it. We knew it. But I think on a deeper level, the reason we're not more upset about the world ending environmentally is I think all of us in our hearts really know that we did everything we could. We really, right? I mean, we really did. I mean, think about it. We brought our own bags to the supermarket. Yeah, that's about it.
Right? I mean, how else to explain this moment that we're in? It's totally crazy, right? This is literally the front page of this paper today. Tory retreat from green policies to woo voters, and there's people running away from the apocalypse. It's crazy. It's totally, totally crazy. But that said, it's not when you think about this, right? We're the victims of our own wiring. We're not set up well for this crisis. It's going over a scale of time that's really, really hard for us to grasp and imagine, and the solutions themselves are sort of hard and just coming online. They did this amazing study where they took people and they aged them, and they put them in front of the person, and they did an MRI, and they scanned them, And their part of the brain that was lighting up wasn't the part that recognizes themselves. It recognizes a stranger. You're just like, who's that? Like, I'm not going to make sacrifices for that. And we know this, right? Because that's why we invented Social Security, 401ks. We had to trick ourselves into taking care of our future selves. So that's super tough when you think about it on a narrative level. So all the climate people, that's why they start doing this stuff, right? They're like, oh, you don't believe it's real? Just like wait until I just like dump all of this apocalypse on top of you, right? And you have one after the next story, which is true and horrifying and grim. But it just gets rougher and rougher and rougher. I talked to this neuroscience scientist, Chris DeMeyer, amazing guy. He said, basically, if you see this stuff without solutions, without paths to action, without things to do, your brain, this is confirmation bias again, wants to protect you. Like, this can't be happening. So there's only two things that you do. Either you go numb, turn the table, you're like, ugh, I can't even look at the paper anymore. Or you turn to conspiracy theories. This can't be real. I can't be doing this. It's literally why it's rising over time. It's the brain protecting itself. There's also this challenge, right, in terms of confirmation bias. So the other way that some people try and do it is like tell a positive story. They're like, oh, well, we need to keep things upbeat. This also doesn't work. When you do this, people are like, oh, that's great. I heard it's solved. That's awesome. Like, I don't have to do anything now. This is like good news. So the first thing that I'm doing from a sort of narrative level is this. Strategies moving from doom and gloom to doom and bloom. You have to tell a real story, a tough story, but you have to give people actual solutions that they can actually do to actually partake in that future that we want to create. This is a project called En-ROADS, and it's a simulation that does exactly this. This is a partner of mine, MIT. People are amazing. And essentially, you're making changes in the present down below, and then you're altering the future. And it shows the truth of what we need to do, which is just hidden in plain sight. We need to cut emissions. That's it. That's really what those bands of color up there are. And the way the simulation model works, very simple. Greenhouse gas concentration, higher temperatures leads to impacts. You can see where those concentrations are coming from. And even more, you can start to see that this is built out of these different human actions. It's all reciprocal one to the next. The challenge is, again, once you look at this level of complexity, your brain's just like pushing it away, right? It made me think about this yesterday from Ed Young. Every animal has its own sensory world, its own thin slice of the fullness of reality. This is what he called the Umwelt. And it started making me think, we had the wrong Umwelt for this crisis, right? What would happen, and this is a thought experiment, if you could actually not just see these bands in a simulation, but you could actually just see them? Like, what if you actually looked out and this is what you saw, right? What if you actually saw within the sky where climate change is coming from every time you look out, right? And you saw it within the wildfires. You saw in every piece of carbon-emitting technology we still have. It'd be much easier to target and diminish, create social pressures. You could choose a hospital or a business based on the impact, just based on the site itself. You could choose and motivate people to turn off different machines. You could like literally see cloud services firing up on your laptop. You could get your Amazon services and understand what that's like. Here's your coffee shop. They just got an amazing, shipment from Africa flown in. Right? Like, come on, let's lay in bed and watch Netflix. It's like, oh, I can't take the smell. We got to go to the porch. So this is a thought experiment, but it made me think actually about a technology that we do have. And this is what I'm prototyping now. So the Dream Cube is a technology we built for Manchester United in China. We built them an experience center in Beijing. Long story, but they're a massive driver of soccer enthusiasm. So we built them a soccer game inside of this cube, which is essentially like virtual reality, but without a headset. So it's social, it doesn't include your senses, and it has all these different functionalities in terms of tracking people. And so I started thinking to myself, what if this simulation, this essential piece of time travel, could be turned into something that you could experience yourself? And it made me think of this amazing quote from Emily St. John Mandel, which I love. Well, time travel fiction makes no sense, but it makes perfect sense. And actually, in this case, imagine the Dream Cube as an agent of time travel. It's sort of like the monolith from Kubrick's 2001. And you can be in the present, and you can be in the future at the same time. So think about it. And I'm sure all of us either have loved ones who will be here in 25 years, or we aspire to be here on this earth ourselves for 25 years. And so the idea is that you'd be able to see both in that future that you're going to inhabit, that you're going to be here for, at the same time that you're in the present making different choices. And these choices are available to lots of different people. I pulled these out specifically for this audience. So anyone who's an investor, I'm going to show you there's great options for you. If you're connected with a school, if you have connections with any type of a school, amazing opportunities. A county or town you might have influence over. Corporation, if you have any connections in terms of work. If you do any volunteer work, you could think about it in terms of climate. Or this applies to everyone, I'm sure, who's a reader. So I'll show you the prototype. Essentially, you go into the Dream Cube, you get dropped in, and this, if you look at the models, is what New York will look like in 2050, right? These are the streets that you're going to be standing on. Yeah, that's what it looked like under Sandy. So imagine it, right? This is the real deal. And that's in Fahrenheit, by the way, 5.9 degrees. That's what the model says if we do nothing. But the good news is, the future's conditional. So if you're an investor, what can you do? Well, little known fact, if you have over $125,000 in the bank, retirement funds, 401ks, that's the equivalent to the carbon footprint of just one American. So do the math on any money you might have in the bank. And think about going, very simple to your investments, just say, pull this out of anything that produces carbon. This is from the New Yorker in 2022. And in this simulation, if you make that choice, you get to lower the temperature to 5.7. And you start to notice that the waters may be moving a little differently. Schools, if you have any connection to schools, there's amazing opportunity around decarbonization. The IRA has unlimited and uncompetitive subsidies for schools. If you look at the carbon footprint of K through 12 schools, the footprint is the same of all the cars in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. This is 6 resolutions that any school board can adopt to decarbonize. It's part of this organization called Undaunted K through 12, which I love. And if you were to actually apply that to all the schools in the model, you could move to 5.7 to 5.5, and you start to notice the water is moving very, very strangely all of a sudden based on your presence. Or business, I have way too many answers to how businesses can change, but these 2 organizations, Drawdown Labs or Climate Voice, have incredible opportunities for anybody who's working inside of a firm or wants to pressure firms from the outsides and apply public pressure. If you pull that lever, it's a big one. You go from 5.9 all the way to 4.9. You start to see the water literally spreading in front of you. If you're part of a county or a town that you can change, this is a story about right here. Nina Tooley, who's married to the creative director, was part of the Climate Action Coalition, did incredible work. This is from the actual group. Their initiative got all the municipalities and local governments in Blaine County, this county, to adopt a clean energy resolution of 100% clean energy by 2035, 100% clean energy by 2045, right? And with that, the water starts to spread and spill and completely dissipate. But there's more to do. If you volunteer, this group I love called Climate Change Makers, they run hourly or weekly 1-hour moments of action where you can write letters to the editor, letters to Congress people, and make these campaign changes happen. If you pull that lever, you can go from 5.4 to 5.3, and you start to see green erupting in the city itself. It's coming literally back to life in this conditional future. And then the last is reader. So just think about all the different ways in which, as you read, you can also share and talk, and most of all, act. And with that, you can literally walk through a simulation of the world at 3.7 degrees Fahrenheit based on all of the choices and actions we take today. So in closing, if we take it personally, if we play for impact, and if we make it real, I promise for you that we can make a future that all of us actually want to inhabit, because we're all going to be there together. And that, for me at least, is the nature of truth. Thank you very much. That's super generous. Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. That's amazing. Wow. Whew. That's incredible. Thank you so much.
We've got time for questions, but I think you had...
Yeah, So I am overwhelmed. I have not shown this deck to anybody. I didn't even show it to my family. It's a big jump into the unknown for me, so thank you for going on the journey with me. I just wanted to ask you if you could put back up the slides. This is the solutions that I was showing, and I'm not going to take this personally at all. Just to give some context, every campaign that I've heard of, the best rate that they can expect from a response is 4%, which means maybe 30 people here. How many people actually might do one of these actions? All right, so that's amazing, and I'm thrilled about it. I have all of this stuff. There's incredible organizations. I'm happy to share this. And this is up here now so that you can get in touch with any of these organizations. But if you have any specific questions, I'm around. Definitely ask me. And with that, I would love to hear any questions or responses.
So, microphones going around. Please hold your hands high. The lighting is a little, I see a hand up there. Anybody? Here?
Those over there?
In the back? Oh, here we are. There's a gentleman here.
Right there. Oh.
Oh.
Oh, yeah, go back. The tech people need to leave it up.
Active audience. We like that. Anybody with questions? There's a woman in pink.
There's a woman. Yes. There it is.
What's your next?
Could you tell, I cannot see the, for schools, what they're doing. Could you tell me what that is again?
Totally. Thank you for asking. So I'm an Emerson Climate Fellow. One of my fellow fellows runs a place called Undaunted K through 12. He's in California, but they're also moving in Massachusetts. And they have basically a templated board resolution with 6 different resolutions that can be passed by different school boards. And they're basically around decarbonization. There's other versions of it, but really the call to action there, similar to the Climate Action Coalition that happened here in Blaine, is to get the resources and then to build a coalition of other people who have influence on school board, whether it's students or whether it's teachers or administrators, and present it directly to the county boards. And really, again, we're in this moment where culture change and adoption is the problem. We have all this amazing money put forth by the federal government, but that money will only get us halfway there. So we need real will and muscle to actually make it happen. So adopting it is like a huge priority.
Thanks. There's a woman in pink with a vest on, if you can get around to her. In the middle. See? Yep. There you go. Thank you. Here comes the mic.
Where is the exhibit in your second example located? I didn't get the location of it.
I'm sorry. It's in Washington, D.C. So it's about 10 minutes from the White House.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Apologies.
Yes, right here. Furza.
Thank you. First of all, you have a very cool life. But secondly, I hear a lot about the fashion industry being a huge contributor to climate problems. And I'm wondering if you are going to be addressing that so that we can be better consumers.
Definitely. I'm glad you asked. It was cut for time, but we actually made an experience in Amsterdam called Fashion for Good that's exactly about that. So it's both a visitor experience and a museum and actually an incubator led by a foundation to build sustainable practices and to convene together a lot of the big sort of players within that world. That said, I think the good news is fast fashion has gotten that message. They're trying ostensibly in their own ways, but trying to attack that, I think, from the industry standpoint is probably more effective than going from the consumer standpoint, although both are really important.
Thanks. And right there, woman in blue. Teal, maybe.
Thank you. So I love what you're doing. Thank you very much for doing it. I had seen that MIT, analysis several years ago.
Yes.
And there are so many choices.
Yes.
One of the things that happens when there are so many choices is that it's easy to say somebody else is going to do something.
Totally agree.
You offer a lot of choices.
Yes.
Do you worry about that people are going to go to your exhibit,
Yeah.
museum, and say, oh, this is really great, and look at all the things that people can do.
Right.
Other people can do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that it's a great question for sure. So first and foremost, I love En-ROADS. I love the people who do it. I love the MIT, and I'm partnered with them. I think it works great for people who love dashboards, which is to say mostly policy people, and that's their audience, right? And lawmakers and business leaders, et cetera. In my case, I wanted to do a lot of the research, as you see here, and find case studies and examples and organizations that people like you or like me could get involved with. Right? Because again, I've seen it over and over again. You bring up climate, and people are like, what about China? What about the military? And the answer is, I don't run China. I don't run the military. But I have a car, and I have a bank account, and I'm part of a school. Right? These are actual tangible changes that you can make. And also, these are changes that are meant to be systems changes led by individuals. That's another sort of sticky trap that unfortunately we've fallen into, which is just like, I'm going to tell you not to eat a burger, and in theory that's going to help, and you're like, really? I mean, I shouldn't eat a burger because it'd probably be better for me, but I know that's not going to solve this crisis. This actually points to some degree of scale. That said, hopefully, the 5 or 6 choices didn't seem too overwhelming, and what I really wanted to do is have people at least concede that they fit into 1 or 2 of these categories. And if they feel like they should do something, it's a lift, it's work, right? And I'm going really against the the typical practice, which is ask people to do little things, right? Because then they can sort of ladder up. And I read this amazing quote. Someone was like, I saw inconvenient truth, and the scariest part about that was when Al Gore was like, buy a light bulb. Because I was like, fucking light bulb? Are you kidding me? Right? Like, that's going to save us? The lift that you would have to take from a school board standpoint to get them to decarbonize is not insignificant. You can ask Blaine County, the Climate Action Coalition folks, right? Nina can tell you, like, it's work. Like, it'll take some effort. That said, every community, every institution, every business, if we're going to get even close to anywhere, is going to have to make that lift. So that's at least my game plan. It could be totally wrong, though. I think, trying to limit the options is probably a good approach.
Jake Barton, folks, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave.
It's brilliant. Brilliant.